August 10th, 1628. Stockholm Harbor is roaring. Thousands stand cheering as the Swedish Empire unveils its ultimate weapon, the Vasa, carved from entire forests, adorned with hundreds of gilded sculptures, and bristling with 64 heavy bronze cannons. This floating fortress was the most lethal warship in northern history, an absolute crown jewel with an inflation-adjusted net worth of $450 million. Yet, 20 minutes into its maiden voyage, a gentle gust of wind hit the sails. The ship tilted, took on water, and vanished beneath the waves. How did an empire spend $500 million on a ship that couldn't survive a breeze? To understand this catastrophe, follow the money and the ego behind it. In the 1620s, Sweden was locked in a brutal war against Poland-Lithuania. To dominate the Baltic Sea, King Gustavus Adolphus ordered a terrifying new fleet. The crown jewel was the Vasa. Master shipwright Henrik Hybertson was hired to build a standard, stable single-gun-deck warship. But halfway through construction, royal ego ruined everything. Obsessed with sheer firepower, the king issued a micromanaged directive. Double the cannons, add a massive second gun deck, and cover the stern in heavy propaganda sculptures. This was an unprecedented design nightmare for a hull of this size. Hybertson knew the laws of physics were being shattered. Doubling the heavy artillery on top meant raising the ship's center of gravity to dangerous levels. But in 17th century Sweden, questioning the king's military vision meant treason. Caught between the unbending laws of naval engineering and the wrath of an absolute monarch, the master builder made a fatal choice. He obeyed. To make matters worse, Hybertson fell terminally ill and died before completion. Leaving his assistants to execute a flawed blueprint they were terrified to correct. The king got his floating palace of ultimate firepower. But in reality, Swedish shipbuilders had just constructed a 1,200-ton top-heavy trap waiting for the first gust of wind. To understand how $450 million vanished in 20 minutes, you don't need a degree in naval architecture. You just need to understand one basic rule of physics: balance. Imagine trying to construct a 10-story concrete skyscraper directly on top of a narrow wooden canoe. The moment any weight shifts, gravity pulls the top down, forcing the bottom to flip. That is precisely what happened to the Vasa. For a warship to stay upright, its center of gravity must sit low beneath the waterline. The heavy hull below acts as an anchor, while the lighter structure above catches the wind. But the king's demands completely inverted this formula, creating a lethal weight distribution problem across two major areas. First came the firepower. The Vasa was loaded with 64 massive, custom-cast bronze cannons weighing over 80 tons combined. Instead of placing the heaviest artillery deep in the lower hull for stability, royal orders forced 32 heavy 24-pounders onto the upper gun deck. This decision lifted thousands of pounds of dead weight high into the air, yanking the ship's center of gravity straight out of the safety zone. Second was the royal ego. To project absolute power, the stern was smothered in over 500 intricate, hand-carved oak sculptures, gilded figures of Roman emperors, mythological beasts, and Swedish lions. These massive oak carvings added hundreds of additional tons of sheer dead weight to the highest, most vulnerable points of the ship's wooden superstructure. The result was a catastrophic engineering mismatch. Underneath the waterline, the underwater hull was far too shallow and narrow, lacking the displacement volume needed to generate riding leverage. Above the waterline sat a towering, top-heavy fortress loaded with metal, oak, and gold. The ship was so dangerously unstable that it didn't even need a storm to capsize. The moment it met the slightest lateral force, the top-heavy mass would act as a massive lever, violently twisting the narrow hull until the open gun ports dipped beneath the waves. When water entered those open ports, buoyancy was lost instantly. The extra weight from above dragged the ship straight to the ocean floor. By prioritizing firepower and prestige over basic physics, the Swedish crown transformed a $500 million warship into a massive sinking hazard before it even reached open waters. The disaster was set in motion long before the sails unrolled. Just days prior, a routine stability test was conducted. 30 sailors ran back and forth across the deck. By the third pass, the vessel rolled so violently it almost capsized in place. The test was stopped out of fear, but nobody dared inform the king. August 10th, 1628. The maiden voyage begins. Thousands of spectators line the shores of Stockholm, cheering wildly. The crew unfurls foresails and opens all lower gun ports to fire a grand royal salute. The Empire's $500 million warship slowly glides out into the open harbor. Then came the first warning. A light breeze caught the canvas. The giant vessel listed heavily to port, alarming the crew as cannons slid across the deck. But as the wind dropped, the ship slowly righted itself. The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief, assuming the worst had passed. It hadn't. Near the island of Beckholmen, a second, stronger gust struck the sails. This time, the excessive top weight pulled the hull past its breaking point. The ship tipped violently to port, reaching a point of no return. Panic exploded on board as crew members scrambled to drop the sails, but physics took over. Because the lower gun ports remained wide open for the ceremonial salute, icy seawater began rushing into the gun deck at thousands of gallons per second. The weight of the ocean dragged the $500 million asset straight down. In full view of thousands of horrified onlookers, the crown jewel of the Navy sank 105 feet into the harbor mud, less than a single mile from where it launched. 30 lives were lost. Total time elapsed, just 20 minutes. When King Gustavus Adolphus received the news at the front lines, he erupted in royal fury, demanding immediate blood and accountability. Find who did this. A formal inquest was launched. Investigators interrogated Captain Sofring Hansen, who proved the crew was sober and the cannons were properly secured. The crew had followed every protocol. The investigation reached an awkward dead end, pointing directly toward the lead shipbuilder, Henrik Hybertson. Because Hybertson had died months before the launch, the tribunal conveniently laid the blame on him, a deceased man unable to defend himself. Nobody dared point out the obvious truth. The ultimate culprit was the king, whose reckless design demands made the ship unseaworthy. As a result, no one was ever prosecuted or punished. The Vasa remained trapped in the harbor mud for 333 years until 1956, when marine archaeologist Anders Frantzen relocated the wreck. In 1961, engineers pulled the near-perfectly preserved hull from the sea. Today, it stands inside Stockholm's Vasa Museum, not as a monument to naval triumph, but as history's most expensive lesson in what happens when political ego overrules the fundamental laws of engineering. The story of the Vasa remains one of history's most humbling financial disasters. A rising global superpower wasted $500 million simply because a ruler prioritized political propaganda over the unbending laws of physics. The crown jewel of the Navy didn't win a single battle, fire a shot in combat, or even escape its own home harbor. Yet, ironically, its value was preserved by the very sea that claimed it. Because the cold, brackish waters of the Baltic preserved the wooden structure for over 3 centuries, the Vasa today serves as an irreplaceable historical treasure. As a globally renowned museum piece, its true modern net worth isn't found in military dominance, but as a perfect, frozen snapshot of 17th century life, naval warfare, and imperial hubris. In military finance, the most expensive asset is always the one that destroys itself. Hit subscribe to join us for more deep dives into history's most catastrophic financial blunders. Next time, we journey into the Cold War, where the Soviet Union built a titanium nuclear submarine costing 2% of their naval budget. A superweapon so insanely loud it alerted every enemy force the second it submerged. Next up, auditing the K-222 Golden Fish.